Welcome to the Energy Transition Technology Chat. I'm joined today by Jesse Morris, the Chief Commercial Officer at the Energy Web Foundation. Jesse, thanks for taking the time to have a chat.
Very happy to be here. Thanks for the introduction and for having me here.
So Jesse, for folks that may not know you, can you do a quick introduction of what you're up to?
Certainly. So again, my name's Jesse. I'm a Chief Commercial Officer at a group called the Energy Web Foundation. My background is I started out as a solar geek right out of university, worked for a couple of different solar companies in the US, made my way to a group called the Rocky Mountain Institute, which is a US-based think tank, focused on renewables, efficiency, helping governments, companies, you name it, basically build business in the context of the energy transition. And long story short, 2 years ago, we stumbled into blockchain technology, literally as a part of a consulting project. And instead of just publishing a white paper to say, this is an interesting technology, maybe it'll create some value, we said, no, that's not enough. And we founded this organization called Energy Web Foundation to bring the technology to the energy sector. So that's a little bit about me.
Okay. Now, for folks like myself and many others in the industry that have been following blockchain within the energy industry, they'll be well aware of the Energy Web Foundation. But for folks that haven't come across the Energy Web Foundation before, what are you guys up to?
So we're a mission-driven organization focused on supporting the acceleration of the energy transition. And maybe the simplest way I can put it is that we want to use digitalization as a propellant for decarbonization. So what does that mean? Basically, if we believe the grid is becoming increasingly renewable, and if we believe that distributed energy resources of all different shapes and sizes are being adopted at accelerated rates, we need a way for all of these different devices and all of these different renewable energy power plants and thermal power plants to be able to communicate with each other in order for the architecture of the grid to actually support a largely renewable system. Right now, if you look at places like Australia, the grid architecture is being pushed to the absolute limit. You have transmission system operators sending price signals and working at odds against distribution system operators. And you have customers who are deploying all sorts of technologies just to try and minimize their electric bills, but doing nothing to support system-wide stability. So our organization recognized that and said, can decentralized technologies help solve some of these problems? Can blockchain technology actually do things as mundane as making it easy for customers to be automatically paid for their contribution to alleviating grid congestion, or something as transformative as making it possible for my electric vehicle to automatically support grid balancing regardless of where it plugs in? So that's kind of the spread of the different kind of use cases we're trying to enable with our technology in the energy sector. But suffice it to say, our focus is to build a open source technology platform that lets companies perform some of those services and applications, while at the same time growing a community of companies to use that technology. Because one thing that gets lost, I think, in a lot of these different organizations and companies that are building unbelievable solutions in support of the energy transition, a lot of the focus is on the tech. And the tech is only as good as the community that uses it. And remember, in energy, we're always talking about dinosaurs in some cases, organizations that have been around for a long time, providing mission critical services to the economy. They don't move fast. So in addition to building tech, we help these companies embrace that tech and build new business on top of it.
Okay. Now, I'm aware with the Energy Web Foundation, you guys have a very extensive affiliates network, and that's made up, as I understand, with many of the energy companies on the planet today. So can you share more about what the affiliates get up to and how they support you guys?
So the affiliates are really part of that community I just mentioned. We've got 103 companies that we've recruited, and they're the organizations that also fund our work, and there are affiliates. So our affiliates fall into, generally speaking, one of three categories. Big corporates, so these could be oil majors that have a big presence in retail electricity markets. They could be distribution system operators. They could be transmission system operators, vertically integrated utilities, you name it. So about a third of the organizations fall into that category. Another third are more solution providers and or startups. According to our analysis, there's something like 200 companies in the greater digital energy blockchain ecosystem, just getting started looking to serve that community of corporates and utilities. We saw an opportunity with EWF to kind of throw a lot of those companies under one umbrella to help connect some of these solution providers with the corporates. So that's the second piece. And then the third group of, the third set of companies in the 103 or so that we have in our umbrella are financial organizations. So in some cases, these are companies looking to actually understand, of those young companies, which ones should I be making a bet on? And more generally, companies just looking to get educated on the space in general. According to our numbers, 170 billion a year is spent on IT in the energy sector. But what's happening is that you're seeing this convergence of IT, typically stuff like Salesforce, Oracle, SAP kind of billing systems, merging with operational technology. So software that's actually used to manage the grid. So that 170 billion is going no way but up. And a lot of these financial players want to see how can they position themselves from an investment perspective in that future. So that's our affiliate community. And we work with them on a day-to-day basis. They help us define the requirements for our blockchain that we've built for the energy sector. They help us define our requirements for products that we've built on top of the blockchain for the energy sector. And they help tell us, what's not working, what is working, what regulations are in the way of us continuing to innovate in the space, what is just not clear from a communications perspective, what kind of stories do we need to help tell so that these companies can make the sell internally. So that's a little bit about our community.
No, gotcha. I spend most of my time looking at new cool technologies. I came across blockchain about 3 or 4 years ago, but like any technology, it's a building block. And as you say, it's an enabler, and as cool and as clever, and some of the stuff is just fascinating in the blockchain industry. But without being able to map it into business models and what problems does it solve and yada, 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 it's just a cool technology. What problem does it solve? I don't know, but buy some. That doesn't work for me. Right?
Yes.
So one of the things I've seen with some of the projects that you guys have with the affiliates is that, as you say, you have the big guys who are trying to fix something or do something. And what I find fascinating is that it's not just, some people are looking at blockchain today to, will blockchain technology fix a problem I have today with the current system or the current way of doing things? But then a lot of people are looking at the whole blockchain in terms of, there's a whole new paradigm around that, decentralized apps, decentralized organization, yada, yada. Supposing we look at things completely different, and blockchain can be just an enabling technology to do some of that. So it's fascinating. And with the different groups in your affiliates, you can kind of get that bouncing around to go, people go, hey, how do we use this stuff to make sense, right?
Definitely. I mean, on one side, you have some of the startups coming in with your latter point, peer-to-peer. That's what they say, peer-to-peer. And, okay, cool. So this toaster can trade energy with that refrigerator. Technically, that's amazing, right? And they can do it in a trustless way and exchange actual real world value. What business problem is that solving? So a lot of the startups, that's kind of how they come into it. But you kind of need that to stretch the design thinking in some cases for how do we run electricity markets? Maybe there is a better way than having a bunch of human beings sitting in a building turning on and off thermal power plants, right? On the other side of the coin, yes, we have companies in our ecosystem that are using our technology in combination with other technologies to solve, frankly, pretty mundane pain points. Settlement, I think, is a really interesting one that has to be solved at scale for the energy transition to take place. Specifically, how can we make it possible for very small homeowners, apartment renters, businesses to actually participate in an electricity market? Well, right now, that's almost impossible because the transaction costs are really high and a lot of those customers just aren't even digitized. So what some companies in our ecosystem have done is to effectively give a digital identity to a building and that building's owner, store some value in that digital identity, and then a utility might send a price signal to that building, use or don't use energy for this 15-minute block. And then depending on how the building's load profile moves in that 15-minute block, settlement happens automatically after that 15-minute interval. So the utility either gets paid, the building owner gets paid, depending on what happened. Very mundane. It's done with some other technologies today, but not necessarily at scale. Mm-hmm. So what many companies in our ecosystem are asking is, can this decentralized technology stack make that happen faster and at lower cost?
Now, you know, with the Energy Web Foundation, you guys are open source, scalable blockchain platform. And let's just look at some of the technologies, because what, as you said, you're enabling people to start building, if you like, applications and use cases, and then how can I use this technology? So what I'm familiar with from you guys is the Energy Web blockchain. You've got the Energy Web Origin and the D3A. So could we just do a quick, what's the Energy Web blockchain?
Yes. So our initial hypothesis was there's lots of blockchains out there. By last count, I think there's 14 or 1,500 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they come in all different shapes and sizes. And we said, we don't see one that is a good starting point for the energy sector, mainly because we want one that is public. So we want any device, any customer to be able to access the chain. But at the same time, we want to restrict who's maintaining the network, because electricity is a mission critical good, right? So our chain allows anybody to use it, but we have a permissioned set of validators, large energy market participants we already trust to maintain the electricity system. So think of ISOs, think of DSOs, energy market companies. So that's our architecture, and it's based on Ethereum. So take Ethereum, copy paste, put it onto our chain with a different consensus mechanism. At its core, that's our blockchain. So with that design, we know who's maintaining the network. We get really high throughput. We can handle many more transactions than the public Ethereum network. There's no mining, so you get rid of the mining roadblock. And we built some other features on it. So really, that's the basis of our blockchain that we built to date.
Right. And then you guys have the Energy Web Origin. What's that about?
Yes. Well, naively, we thought, hey, let's build this blockchain and all this wonderful stuff will start happening on it. Well, that may have, that didn't exactly roll out like that. So we really recognized a need, and this is really where our value add is in the layer above the blockchain. So Origin is a open source software development toolkit focused on helping market participants create markets for renewable energy. It's the simplest way I can describe it. Right. And so the way on the business side, just to kind of lay that out there, it is open source, but we also use lesser licenses for companies that don't necessarily want to release everything that they've done to the software, right? If I'm a corporate and I take that toolkit and I make some changes to it, but I don't want everyone to see what I've done, we have flexibility there. So that when I say we're open source, we are, but that's the way that we're structured with these toolkits. And this toolkit is very, it's pretty simple. We were told by our ecosystem that tracing exactly where renewable energy comes from is challenging right now, incurs quite a few transaction costs, and not everybody can participate. Case in point, in the US, if you're in a regulated market, you have to basically get up to a 1 megawatt hour block to be able to participate in a market. If I'm a homeowner generating 5,000 kilowatt hours a year, I can't participate in that market, right? So we've built this toolkit that can go all the way down to 1 kilowatt hour intervals, all the way up to the biggest kind of regulated market you can think about. And it enables decentralized certificate exchanging in both regulated and deregulated markets.
And again, you know, you mentioned earlier that working through your affiliates, you're trying to solve real world problems as opposed to here's a cool piece of technology and yeah, my toaster will talk to your solar panel. I'm in France, you're in Switzerland. As you say, it's fascinating that the technology could do that, but why? As opposed to having a business problem around tracing renewable energy certificates or whatever, right? And
one interesting thing that Origin does, because blockchains, it's not just the blockchain. One of our partner organizations called Watttime has a really interesting algorithm where they can actually estimate on a 15-minute basis how green, brown, or black your energy is, depending on where it came from. Okay. And that's a very interesting innovation, because right now, a REC or a guarantee of origin are kind of treated the same. There's not different levels of carbonality depending on when or where that energy was produced. So now we have these certificates coming from all these different assets, and those certificates are also referencing Wattime's algorithm. So now each certificate has a different carbonality depending on how much carbon was being offset at that moment in time. So blockchains are really interesting for being able to stack these different innovations on top of each other.
And the third one, the one that my favorite, is the decentralized autonomous area agent. What's that focused on?
This is focused on making that peer-to-peer future of the toaster talking to the solar panel a bit more tangible from a business perspective, right? So the D3A is a simulation environment that has been co-developed by one of our founders at Energy Web Foundation, a company called Grid Singularity, and us. And it is a simulation tool that helps affiliates in our ecosystem and beyond it understand what is the value in a peer-to-peer energy market, right? So it's a simulation tool at this stage. What it can do is it simulates an entire distribution area to show, okay, if this building is trading energy with this building over a certain course of time with this load profile, how much money is saved versus the way that we currently architect and run electricity markets. And that market can go from home to home, and then from distribution line to distribution line, and then from distribution network to distribution network. So it's a recursive kind of Russian doll nested market model that allows utilities to just simulate what is the value behind those kinds of peer-to-peer electricity markets. That's what the D3A is now. But the idea is that we want to use that as a starting point to show companies where the value is in those kinds of markets, and then work with them to deploy it. So right now it's a simulation tool, but the idea is to turn that software into an actually deployable model where that kind of logic and framework can be embedded in smart home gateways and devices and on distribution networks.
Gotcha. Now, Jesse, we met up a couple of weeks back at a blockchain to energy event with Solar Plaza up in Amsterdam. And one of the refreshing things about that event was there was a good deal of realism about blockchain in the energy industry today. You know, 18 months ago, we were probably at peak hype. ICOs, white papers, green papers, all sorts of papers, right? There's been a lot of, let's say, shakeout and a good dose of reality has kicked in. Where do you see the current state of blockchain in energy? Because a lot of people think, that's gone, that's over already.
We are in crypto winter, which is impacting the entire space, whether we're talking energy blockchain, whether we're talking other blockchain. Yeah. That is very healthy from our perspective. There was a lot of questionable arguments being levied about what the technology is capable of, for sure. So a tide has pulled back, and the companies that we think can remain are going to be the ones that we hope will prosper as this technology continues to be adopted. I would say, given the current state of the market, the biggest challenges we see on a day-to-day basis aren't necessarily technological. They aren't even regulatory. They are about internal corporate culture. That is, there's an immense amount of social engineering that needs to take place to move a project from an innovation department to a full-blown commercial product or service that's embraced by an entire corporate culture. This is the valley of death, not from an investment perspective, but from a corporate culture perspective that a lot of these projects are facing. There's probably a dozen projects in our ecosystem that are trying to bridge that valley today. And so that's what we see as one of the biggest challenges right now in the ecosystem, is helping corporates bridge that valley. I'd say the second one is, so there were more ecosystem startups in our ecosystem when we began the project than there are right now. Some of these startups have just gone out of business because they couldn't secure a first customer, because they just ran out of capital, because perhaps they weren't solving a business problem. So I think that's probably scaring away some innovators right now, recognizing how hard it is to really develop long-term recurring revenues selling some of these solutions. On the technology side, to mention one technology barrier, because I'm not saying everything is figured out by any means, we have a scalability problem. Everybody talks about scalability with blockchains. How many transactions per second can you handle? For the current world of applications, like Origin that I was talking about, we're relatively certain as a community that today's generation of blockchains can handle the kind of throughput we need. For example, in the Origin description I offered, we track those transactions going on a daily basis, hash all of the transactions, and then pass them to the chain. So really, we're only talking about submitting less than 10 transactions per day. If we have this peer-to-peer marketplace, we could envision millions or billions of transactions flowing across blockchains. And there is a lot of work going on to handle that kind of throughput. We're not there yet. And in the next couple of years, we hope to see this third generation of blockchain technology coming out. But suffice it to say, we don't have an infrastructure capable of handling the entire energy sector at scale right now.
No, I agreed. And, personally, I'm a big believer in blockchain technology. And as you say, you know, what do you call it? We're at version 2 right now, or 2.5, and 3 is coming, and whatever. If you looked at the way the internet developed, you know, we're just at the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah, there are, oh, it's not scalable and there's too much energy, but then there's different consensus mechanisms. You have parachains and off chains and all sorts of chains. And, you know, I could see my electric vehicle talking to, well, my house talking to your house in the local network, in the local microgrid, for want of a better word, using blockchain technology. And we're seeing companies, you know, blockchain as a service in the cloud from Google and the Amazons and IBM and others. Microsoft, you're getting Itron being able to deploy distributed applications onto smart meters. So they could be a smart contract, which is a piece of software. So I'm quite optimistic that, yeah, as you say, there's a lot of maturing to go on, but like any technology, we're just, you know, this is just kicking off. Like, you know.
Yes, indeed. I think 1 year from now will be very different from where we sit even today. Yeah.
You mentioned as well, and this was a thing we chatted about in Amsterdam, was around, if you like, the cultural change. And utilities have been relatively, you know, they get a bad rap at times. They're sometimes slow to adopt new technologies, but yet they've been playing with everything: augmented reality, drones, blockchain, wireless, you name it, right? They'll have an innovation team somewhere doing something. But now with electric vehicles and the whole demand response and solar, you know, a couple of years ago and whatever, they're being forced to kind of, God, we have to change. We can't just not do anything anymore. And it's not just taking technology to apply to today's problem. It's like, if we completely rethink how we do this, and if you like, the philosophy around blockchain, decentralization, and
yes,
the new workforce coming into the workforce, right? One of the biggest challenges in the energy industry today is let's face it, a lot of them are my age and older. So you have the next generation workers coming in, and these folks are looking at things very differently. So I find that fascinating.
Software is eating the world. That's the saying, right? And it hasn't come at scale to the electricity sector, I would say, yet. Certain operations are becoming digitized and have been for some time. We look at smart meters, we look at transmission system operations, and some distribution system operations. But really, we're still talking about a pretty analog industry. And indeed, the workforce is changing very quickly. If companies can think about, especially in regulated markets, making investments on the electric grid that are digital and not just physical, that's going to attract the next generation of workers. And we see that. IT departments are growing. Innovation departments, I mean, they're twice or 3 times the size from when I even started working on blockchain and energy, which was 2.5 years ago. So yes, there is this massive recognition that it's not just that maybe there's some value in these technologies you mentioned, it's that market realities, especially in places like Australia, in places with deep renewable energy penetrations, this is a problem that needs to be solved sooner rather than later.
No, I agreed. And you know, to your point, I've spent most of my career in the or what became known as digitization and IoT before IoT was a thing, right? And if you mentioned the TSO networks, right? You know, the ability to be able to manage the most complex real-time system end-to-end in Europe or across the US or in China or whatever in real time is fascinating. So there's a lot of innovation, a lot of technology, a lot of software being put in, but it's all under the covers. People don't see it. And now it's with the whole, people talk about peer-to-peer and taking ownership of my energy in my village and my town and whatever. It is a fascinating time. The energy transition isn't done yet, right? There's a long way to go.
Yes, indeed.
So Jesse, in terms of looking at the Energy Web Foundation in 2019, what have you guys got planned for the rest of the year and into next year?
Our blockchain is currently a test network, and there's multiple experiments running on it. What we're really excited to talk about is that sometime around June or July, we will hopefully be able to announce the release of the public version of the chain, or the commercial version of the chain, meaning that actual value can flow across it. And that's very different from what we have right now. So we are sprinting right now on technical regulatory front to get to that point where we can fully launch the chain and begin to fully decentralize it so that EWF is not the only shepherd of the technology. That's going to be a massive milestone for us. I hope to have that in June or July. Beyond there, more product development. We have Origin, which we talked about. We have another product that's becoming more mature. It's called more mature, called Link. Link is basically enabling IoT devices to connect to a blockchain, which is an easy sentence to say, but the amount of technical sophistication needed for that to be true is mind-boggling. And so this is another software development kit that we've produced called Link. And then there will be other kits coming out, likely focused on electric vehicles and potentially electric asset registries. So those are additional products that we'll be working on throughout the year. And the other thing I should mention is that in June in Berlin, we have a large conference that we sponsor and is led again by one of our co-founders, Grid Singularity, called Event Horizon 2019. A major blockchain and energy conference where there will be a lot of innovators from across the globe, really good time, kind of the premier energy blockchain conference, I would say, that's out there in terms of both good content depth, but also just fun. This is not your typical wear a suit and sit back in an audience and potentially fall asleep in a breakout session.
Well, I attended Event Horizon last year in Berlin, and I can certainly guarantee you it is not your average energy conference. I go to a lot of them. It was fascinating, just the level of pardon the pun, energy, but from startups to deep dives to blockchain 101 for folks like myself to figure out what was going on. It's a unique conference, and yeah, it is. As far as I know, I've been to quite a few. It is the premier blockchain in energy event worldwide, period, right? There's a few small ones here and there, and they're good, but Event Horizon is certainly something for the calendar.
Yes.
Alrighty, Jesse, come here. If people want to get in contact with you or find out more about the Energy Web Foundation, where should they go?
Check out our website, energyweb.org. If you're a technical developer, there's plenty of links to all of our GitHub repositories. We're trying to create as much of a community there. If you're more on the business or marketing side, plenty of contact information on the website for all of our products in the general affiliate community.
Super. Jesse, thank you very much. Thanks for taking the chat.
Thanks, Kevin.